Hi, it's Rob from the Brush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to paint a Poxwalker, this time using normal paint.
So, first colour we're going to use is Citadel Mephiston Red. I'm just going to use this to paint his innards. You can also do round his mouth if you want to. It's not too important at the moment, no. The reason I'm doing a second Poxwalker, this time using normal paint rather than the contrast, is just so you can see the difference in time and the number of layers and things like that you'd be doing, painting them all by hand or painting them with contrast. Now, there is a previous Poxwalker video which I've done years ago, but this one's a little bit newer, a little bit quicker. So next up we're going to be using a little bit of Citadel Pink Horror. We're going to be using this to do some of his innards and also some of the tentacles that are growing out of him. Now, you don't have to do specific tentacles in specific colours, do the tentacles whichever colour you want. I'm going to do some of them pink and purple as the video goes on. But whatever colour you're going to do, you can do the pink now and then I'll do the colours later. So next up, Citadel Kislev Flesh, a slightly paler skin tone that we're using on him here. We're going to use this and we're going to make it look like the skin's a bit more dead. The original Poxwalker had bits of green and sort of some quite bright skin tones, but I wanted to kind of tone it down a little bit so that the skin looked a little bit more dead than it did bright. Just give a nice smooth layer of this across all the skin. You might notice that I'm leaving any areas that are joining onto tentacles or where the tentacles sort of come out of it. I'm just going to do the tentacles so they join straight onto the flesh with this, not too much blending or anything like that. Now I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Rakarth Flesh. I'm going to use this for any of the bone segments poking out. Now, depending on how you're doing the bone on the spiny growths on the Poxwalkers, I'm doing the bone colour on these. The previous ones I've gone from sort of like a black colour to red. Now I'm going to paint all of the Pox with Citadel Dorn Yellow. It's a nice kind of bright yellow, not bright as in the colour, but it's a very light yellow, I should say. But it's a good colour for the Pox and giving them quite a foul look. You can hear loads of noise in the background, apologies for that, the wind's blowing and the rain is hammering down at the minute. Once you've finished all the Pox, we can move on to the next colour. Next up, Citadel Xereus Purple, and again we're going to be using this to do tentacles. So if you're doing the tentacles with the purple and pink, then just mix up whichever ones you want to do purple, whichever ones you want to do pink. There's no specific method to it, you don't have to do any specific ones, any specific colour. So whatever ones you want to do, hammer them with the Xereus Purple now, and do the ones with the Pink Horror. Next up, it's going to be a little bit of Vallejo Russian uniform, World War II. It's one of the Flames of War colours. If you can't get your hands on this, just use any kind of olive drab colour, that'll be fine. So I have a couple of olive drab colours from Vallejo, but I'm pretty certain loads of other paints on the market will be a similar kind of colour. So as I say, any olive drab colour. Just going to use this on the loincloth. If it was one of the ones that's wearing items of clothing as well, I'd be using this, mainly because I'm doing my Poxwalkers as though they've been Imperial Guard or a PDF or something like that, so they're all in kind of the military green colour. Next up is a little bit of Citadel Leadbelcher. I'm going to use this to do his bionic arm. Just give that a nice good coat, and we can move on to the next colour. Now I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Baneblade Brown, and this is going to be to the pouches and the belt. That's a great colour this. Doesn't look like much when you put it on, but once you put that snakebite leather contrast on it, it gives a really nice leather effect. I will be touching that up with paint, but you don't really have to be honest. It does just give a really nice leather effect with that. So it's entirely up to you whether you add colours to it after you've put the snakebite leather on later on or not. Just give these a nice coat in the Baneblade Brown. We can go on to the next colour. Next up, a little bit of Vallejo Modeler Rust. This is just to do the little Nurgle symbol, which is hanging in front of his loincloth there. It does actually have like a little domed part. I'm going to be painting that like a little green gemstone, just to give it a nice bit of detail. I'm going to start with the shades. We're going to use some Citadel Druchii Violet. And for the Druchii Violet, you want to go over all of the purples that you've placed on, and also all of the Mephiston Red as well. Don't worry too much about the pink horror. We'll be going over that with the different shades shortly. You can also paint the pink tentacles with this too. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Carroburg Crimson. I'm going to use this to paint the innards that are hanging out and the tentacles that are coming out of his stomach there, just to give them a bit more of a gory look compared to the tentacles which are outside the body. Now it's going to be some Citadel Nuln Oil. You're going to use this to do his belt buckle and also his bionic arm. Give that a good covering so it gets into all the recesses and shades that nicely for you. Then we can move on to the next shade. Like so. Next up, Citadel Athonian Camo Shade. I'm going to be using this on the olive drab of the loincloth. Just give that a good coating. It's only a very quick layer, this one, then we can move on to the next. Like so. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Seraphim Sepia. I'm going to use this to do the bone spur. It's poking out the side of his head here. Some of them have masses of these spurs coming out of them, so use it for all them if you're doing a different miniature. Now it's on for a little bit of Citadel Agrax Earthshade. We're going to use this just to do the modeler rust area, which we did at the bottom here. Now I've got to go for some Citadel Drachenhof Nightshade. Now you're just going to give this a light coating. You don't want too much in the recesses because you don't want that massive amount of blue showing through. But you want it enough that there's a little bit of shade in the recesses. And you do want it so that all of the skin looks blue, because once you start reapplying the colour, it'll give it that kind of dead look, where the blood's drained from it and it's not looking too pretty. Now it's time for a little bit of Citadel Snakebite Leather Contrast. We use this on the belt and the pouches, going over the Baneblade Brown that we put down earlier. As I say, once this dries, it does give a really nice leather effect, so you may not want to add any colours to it. I'll probably be using a little bit of Mournfang Brown and Rakarth Flesh to touch that up and give it a few scrapes, but it's not really that necessary, to be honest. If you want to be doing a quick paint job, you can just whack that Snakebite Leather on there and then leave it as is, like so. So now I'm going to start working on the skin again. We're going to reapply some Citadel Kislev Flesh, making sure that you leave some of that Drachenhof Nightshade in the recesses. Now they are quite good, these. There's a lot of detail on that skin. If not pox and things like that, then you've got all the kind of creases and things like that where the muscle groups are and things, so makes them look pretty cool. So now that we've added the Kislev Flesh, we're now going to add some Deepkin Flesh from Citadel to the Kislev Flesh, and then add another layer of that. Now you can see that from the Kislev Flesh over the Drachenhof Nightshade, it's already got like kind of a greyish mottled skin look to it. when you start adding this Deepkin flesh to it, it just makes it look like the blood has flown away from the extremities. We're highlighting this a bit more where the light is coming down from above to hit it, and so you're going to have some nice highlights from that. So I'm going to add a little bit more Citadel Deepkin flesh to the previous mix. Extra long showing what paint it was there. I'm just going to reapply this layer, highlighting all of the bits that we previously highlighted. So you want to be leaving the previous layers there. You also want to be leaving the Drakenhof Nightshade in the recesses. Like so. Now we're going to start working on those tentacles again. We're going to use Citadel Xereus Purple. You want to be leaving the shade in the recesses where you've got each of those segments to the tentacles. You want to make sure that you leave the shade in the recesses there and only paint on the convex areas of the tentacles. Now I'm going to be using a little bit more Genestealer Purple, or just using Genestealer Purple I should say. I'm going to use this to highlight the tentacles that we've just done, the Xereus Purple tentacles. So you want to be thinking more about where the light's going to be catching these and doing the highlights accordingly to them. So on top surfaces and things like that, you're not going to have this Genestealer Purple going all the way around the tentacles underneath it, mainly on the bits where the light is going to catch it. Be able to see that on the large tentacle on his back here. We start with the next colour, which is going to be Citadel Pink Horror. Going to use this to highlight the purple tentacles. We're also going to do the colour back on the pink tentacles. Once you've done that, you can come back to the next layer. Next up, we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Emperor's Children, and we're going to use this to highlight the pink horror tentacles. Now we're going to be using some Citadel Contrast Volupus Pink. We're going to use this for going around all of the pox and around the wounds and things like that. This gives a nice angry red colour. You can, if you drag the brush away from the skin and towards the pox. So if you drag the brush towards the pox, an easy way of saying it, you will get more of the contrast near the pox than you will do further out. And this will give you that kind of like pink to dark red going towards the pox. Or if you just apply the Volupus Pink, you can use some Vallejo Red Wash, and we can go around those areas that you've just used the Volupus Pink and add that slightly less red, pinkish kind of hue to the skin to make it look as though it's quite diseased and infected. Depending on how you want to work it and how quick you want to do it, this is probably the quickest way because you don't have to spend that much time going around each of the pox. You can kind of rough go around all the pox and then add the red wash to it. And that kind of blends it all in together and makes it look that angry red, that sore, painful flesh. Now we're going to go back to the Vallejo Russian uniform, World War II. We're just going to start reapplying colour to the loincloth. There's a very straightforward part to do this. So just reapplying it, leaving the Athonian camo shade in the recesses, like so. Next up, we're going to add some Citadel Nurgling Green to the Russian uniform World War II, and we're now going to highlight that loincloth. You can give it another highlight if you want to after this. You don't really have to. It's going to have that many details and other things that are catching the eye that you don't really tend to notice it too much. But if you want to do one, by all means do so. We're now going to use a little bit of Citadel Mournfang Brown. I'm just going to add a little bit of this brown to the leather pouches and the belt. As I said earlier, you don't really need to do this too much. The snakebite leather shade over the Bane Blade Brown does kind of do the job for you. But wanted to add a little bit of Rakarth flesh to the Mournfang Brown, then give it some scrapes and things like that. Just pick out those details so that we can give it that worn leather look. Like so. I'm going to add a little bit more Rakarth flesh to the previous mix. I'm going to go over that one more time, this time doing the usual scuffs that we do. To make it look like that belt and the pouches have been scraped against everything, and they are very, very worn, not well maintained. Now we're going to use a tiny little bit of Nihilakh Oxide, and this is going to be just to do on that area of modeler rust, just a few little bits on that, to give it that oxidized look. Now I'm going to use Citadel Dorn Yellow. I'm just going to pick out some of these pox. There may be one or two that we've missed on the way round earlier, so that now that we've done the shades and we've done the tender and inflamed skin, you can see them a lot better, so we can now just add the Dorn Yellow to all of those. Okay, so next we're going to be adding white to Mook Green, which I appear to have not recorded being painted onto this little gemstone here. So first of all, paint this little gemstone on the Nurgle badge with Mook Green, then add a little bit of white to it and just highlight with a crescent on the bottom left hand side. Now we're going to add a little bit more white to the previous mix. I'm just going to do a slightly smaller crescent on that little gemstone there. Just checked through all the footage and can't find anything to do with that Mook Green spot, so I've clearly not recorded that. So this is just pure white now. We're going to do one spot of pure white on the top right of the gem, and a tiny thin line of pure white on the bottom left hand side, like so. Now the Mook Green there is a little bit too bright around that highlight on the top right, so we're going to turn that down with a little bit of Citadel BL Tan Green. You can just do that around where the white spot is. I'll just darken that up and give that a deeper shade to the gemstone in that part. Now it's going to be Citadel Rakarth Flesh. I'm going to reapply some colour to the bone spur which is growing out the side of his head. going to make sure when you're coming down to the base of the bone spurs that you are doing the ridges, so that it does look like where the bone is going into the head and you've got those little creases and things. You do want to make sure that you're leaving the sepia in the recesses, and if there isn't too many of those little recesses, just paint straight lines down with the Rakarth flesh and leave some sepia between it. So now we're going to add some Citadel Ushabti bone to the Rakarth flesh. I'm going to do the first layer of highlights on these bone spurs. Again, you're not going to cover the whole thing with this colour, you're just going to do a little bit towards the top, and then you're going to do the little ridges that run down to the base of the bone spur. Now we're going to use pure Ushabti bone and just do a nice little layer on this and a few of the little ridges too. That just gets them to stand out and gives them a bit of a highlight. Now, using a little bit of Citadel Agrax Earthshade now, we're going to add a little bit of weathering and wear and tear to his bionic arm. So you just want to put some of this on to brown it up, make that look a little bit grimy and dirty because it's not going to have been kept in the best condition given the state of the rest of him. Now we're going to use some Seraphim Sepia once the Agrax Earthshade's dry. We're just going to add some more wear and tear to this bionic arm. The Seraphim Sepia adds that nice orangey yellow colour to it, makes it look like it has started to rust, or at least it's got that initial discoloration that it gets. A very, very quick and simple way to do that. Now we're going to use some Citadel Carroburg Crimson. We're going to do his mouth and where his teeth are. Just go over them. Good thing about doing it this way is you can see where the teeth are when you come to paint them because they stand out against the shade, because the shade goes to the recesses. We're also going to do around each of the tentacles and the open wounds as well, and just give the Carroburg Crimson a little bit there to let it look like it's all inflamed and it's a bit raw and bloody. We're also going to do blood trickles coming down from all of the wounds and the openings on him. Next up, we're going to use some Typhus Corrosion on that bionic arm. Try and keep this mainly to the bigger areas, not so much all the joints and things like that on the hands and the arm. Although you may have been stood stationary for a while for it to seize up, you do want to try and make it look like it's just the bigger parts that have gone rusty. I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Riser Rust. And just start applying this gently to the areas where you've had that Typhus Corrosion. You need to make sure the Typhus Corrosion is fully dry when you do this, otherwise it does mix with it. You get that strange browny orangey colour. It doesn't look quite as nice as if it's all dry. Now we're going to return to Carroburg Crimson to add more of the runs from the wounds and the trickles down onto the clothing and stuff. I just wanted to finish that rusty arm because we're going to be adding some to that as well. It just means that you can add the gore and the grime to it all as one, rather than having a completely clean arm or completely clean areas around it. So I'm doing more onto the loincloth here. I'm going to be doing drips on the insides of the legs and the feet as well, because where that wound is in the centre, that is going to be leaking quite a lot. Now it's time for Vallejo White. We're going to do his teeth and his eye. Now the eye is the easiest part of this. Remember, always paint away from the nose. And we're going to start painting the individual teeth. Like we did when we were painting them with the contrasts, if you do happen to make two teeth into one big tooth, you can just use a little bit of Carroburg Crimson, do a vertical line between them and separate those teeth back again. I do really like how happy these guys look. It's the most horrific of times, but they're still smiling. Now I'm going to use a little bit of Vallejo Black. I'm going to use this to paint the pupil on his eye. Like so. Next up, it's time for Blood for the Blood God. You can tell it's getting towards the end of the model. This is the final colour we're going to use. We're going to use Blood for the Blood God around all the open wound areas. You're going to do trickles from any open wounds on his back. You're going to do runs of it dripping down from where the tentacles are, on his legs, on his feet, on his hand, anywhere you want to really put it. You don't want to put bags and bags of it on all over because it will make it look a bit messy. But down the front where he's all open, you can have quite a lot there. You can have quite a lot running from these wounds on the shoulders and the head, just to make that look red and fresh. And that is the finished Poxwalker. I'm really happy with how it turned out. It does look a little bit better than with the contrast, but it does take a lot longer, so again, choice is yours how you paint them up.
Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media linked below. Thanks very much.
If you like the channel, you enjoy the content, and you'd like to support us, please head to our coffee page linked below where you can buy us a brew. Thanks very much.